Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this webinar. Thanks for joining. Well, we all are struggling with some kind of business problem that we just don't know how to even start tackling it. And my design thinking and some other agile methods be of help here. Very happy to have two design thinking experts with me today. These are Jennifer Hehn. I may need my notes here. She's an experienced design thinking consultant at our university and researches design thinking and requirements engineering. And Dr. Rachel Brooks, she facilitates design thinking workshops with corporate clients at our executive school. And her research and teaching focuses on solving wicked problems in multinational corporations. And my name is Friederike Reder. Before I welcome them here, I would like to mention just two things for those people joining us for the first time today. The discussion after the presentation, the discussion of your questions is very important, so please send us your questions anytime by using the F&A or Q&A field of your Zoom program. Also, of course, we will record the session and send you the link sometime next week. Also, you will need the chat function later, so you may already start looking for that in your Zoom program. So now, I would like to welcome Jennifer and Rachel. Thank you so much for taking the time. The floor is yours, and I wish you an insightful lunch break.
Thank you so much for the introduction, Friederike. And it's so wonderful to be here as a HSG alum myself, speaking to HSG alumni and others interested in this really important topic at this moment in time. The bottom line is, if you're here, you're facing a wicked problem. You're facing an unsolvable problem. I can say this with certainty because we absolutely all are. It's an incredibly complex moment in history, and the interconnectedness of our society is more intense than ever. What is a wicked problem? To define it briefly, it's a problem that's incomplete, it's ever-changing, its impact on people, and it's impacted by such a large number of people that its complexity just keeps growing. And it's also interconnected with a series of other problems. So if you're solving one problem today, it might have turned into another one by tomorrow. Business, and let me just briefly jump in here and open up my slides. Business is dominated by these problems, and I want to look at just a couple of examples here just so that we can all get on the same page. Many are asking, how can we position ourselves to excel in the future? How can we leverage the trend of digitalization? This is a huge one. How can we be more innovative? What makes these problems wicked is that you cannot predict where they're going in the future. This question of digitalization, what it means today is, I'm sure we can all agree, definitely not what it's going to mean in 5 years and certainly not in 10 years. So the tools that we're using today, the solutions we're developing today, what will this mean for us tomorrow? Maybe nothing. So what's the result? The result is that many of us feel like we're making it up as we go along. And frankly, we are, because there are no precedents for what we're dealing with right now. One manager that I worked with in a multinational company said he felt like he was constantly building the plane while flying. So imagine that picture. The stakes are really high. It's life and death. The urgency is extreme, but so is the uncertainty. You really don't quite know what you're doing. How can we tackle these problems? That's what we would like to address with you today. Hopefully we can shed some light on a couple of approaches that have been really helpful for us. But it's all held together by the principle of getting more human-centered. And what do we mean by that? We mean focusing on needs over solutions. But what do I mean by that? So I'd like to try a quick exercise. So perhaps put down your sandwich and jump in. If you could get yourself to the chat box on your screen, I want to hear from you, and there will be a lot of answers, so I won't be able to get through all of them. What are the needs here? What are his needs? What is this person's need? So if you could take a moment. And Friederike could perhaps support me with opening the box. Excellent. All right, we already have some answers coming in. Quickly. Stability, help, a boat, a bridge, to survive. Help, again. Support, a rope. Excellent, a bathing suit. Great, dry clothes, to let go. No, so these are all great. These are fantastic. Strong muscles, don't lose the bike. Okay, I'm getting sucked in. I want to know what comes next, but thank you. What we see here is ultimately some really fantastic ideas, but a real dominance in solutions. So a bridge. This is a solution. Are we sure that he needs a bridge? Actually, the need here is he needs to cross this river. If we say he needs to cross the river, we reduce the prescriptiveness. We don't say how he needs to cross the river. We just say he needs to do that. So the innovative potential is expanded. All of a sudden, there are a lot of potential answers, and we have a lot of opportunities when exploring which one to take further. So that's just a little warm up on needs versus solutions. What I'd like to do is tell a little story that I think really grounds this even more in reality, this idea of needs versus solutions. And I want to look at the case of a food multinational corporation. This is a farmer. This is a Colombian coffee farmer named Jorge. And what do I want to tell us about Jorge? His life is getting a lot harder. His life is getting harder because all of a sudden he has to harvest year-round his coffee instead of just twice a year as it used to be, because changes in weather result in his trees constantly producing. If you let coffee beans fall to the ground and you don't deal with them, you get pests. If you get pests, you lose your crops. He's opened up to, not only does that result in this intense need for constant harvesting, he constantly needs labor. This is costing him money. He obviously isn't always harvesting a lot of coffee, but he still needs the labor. So this is costing him money, and it's costing him time. Extreme weather is changing the quality of the coffee he's able to produce, which means he can sell less of it. The point that I'm driving at here is that this is, while a very specific example, and we may wonder what it has to do with business, for this multinational corporation, what it has to do with their business is that they rely on these smallholder producers, and that the uncertainty that comes along with climate change, the effects of which farmers are already experiencing, makes their supply chains also more uncertain. Where are they going to get high quality agricultural goods in the future? This should also concern us as human beings. This has to do with food security. This has to do with our future, but it also threatens this company's business model. So what did this company decide to do? This company really recognized this problem, and it recognized the need to address environmental and social sustainability in its supply chains, to make farming something attractive for farmers, which increasingly it is not. They also realized they didn't know a lot about what was happening across the globe in their various different supply chains. So they decided very early on a solution. They decided that they needed to develop a measurement framework to identify what those needs were. The challenge is that by saying they needed a measurement framework, despite the fact that they set up a really cross-organizational, cross-sector, international collaboration around developing this solution, they were stuck on measurement framework. And that meant that all effort went to identifying what is this framework, what does it look like, what are the KPIs. It was really limiting. So this is what led me to design thinking. How can it be that a bunch of intelligent, passionate, good-hearted people sitting around a table trying to solve the same problems just can't, or can't find the most meaningful solution out there? Design thinking helped me understand that the focus on needs is incredibly pertinent. And that's why I want to take us to one other example of a company I worked with after this realization. They also wanted to improve quality of life for farmers, but they were focused on needs and did extensive exploration, and we identified a small number of farmers in their cocoa producing supply chain that were uniquely entrepreneurial, and they had a need to create. And they were creating new varietals of cacao that were more resistant, that were more productive, that were better quality. They were creating new activities on their farms that went far above and beyond the resilience-focused activities on many farms. They were establishing partnerships with educational institutions to strengthen the regional pride around cocoa production. So what am I trying to say here? My point here is that for companies, this focus on needs can be transformative. Yes, this second solution impacted less people, but for the people that it did impact, it really transformed their lives. And it also transformed the perception of what it meant to be a cocoa farmer in this region. So, on that note, let's talk more about design thinking. Jenny, what's design thinking?
Rachel, good starting questions. Thank you. Well, design thinking, as the name basically suggests, is grounded in the way designers think. And it's a powerful way to actually address the unknown and to tackle these unsolvable problems that we have heard before. And what design thinking does technically is it applies extensive user research in order to really understand the needs of your users and customers, the people that you are designing something for, and it combines it with rapid prototyping techniques in order to test your ideas quickly and again talk to people and users to challenge your assumptions and to test first ideas. And all of that is best done in a multidisciplinary team, because as a team, you can look from different perspectives on your problem, and that might help you get a better and holistic understanding of your problem. And this is what we basically aim for, understanding the problem before jumping to solutions too quickly. And the picture that you can see here on the slides basically says that design thinking starts with the human, and you want to create something that is desirable from a human point of view. But then as next step, you of course want to make sure that you as a company or an organization can actually do it. So you need to take into account feasibility, and you want to make money out of it as well. So it needs to be economically viable as well. So in the end, with design thinking, you start with the human, but you check for feasibility and viability, and then you come to the sweet spot in the middle. And what all of that does basically is you want to minimize the risk of creating something that nobody wants in the end or needs.
That was a fantastic clarification. Thank you, Jenny. Now, what's the hype around design thinking? I'm hearing about it all the time these days. Is it just a trend?
Absolutely. Design thinking is quite a hype right now. And well, what is supported by that is a lot of big and large consultancies are acquiring design agencies in order to gain these design skills and these design competencies that go all the way to problem solving. And around this hype, there are quite a cloud of buzzwords that come up with design thinking if you Google it. Innovation, disruption, agility, and what I try to do in the next 10 minutes is to bring some clarification from our research, but also practice experience on where we see design thinking, for example, as compared to agility. However, it is a hype right now. I will explain to you in a second why it is, but I want to root design thinking back to its origins, because that way you can see that it's quite old already. So it dates back around 40 years to the Stanford University and the mechanical engineering department, to be specific there. And there at that time, professors realized that in addition to teaching their students on how to build a machine or engineer a product, they also wanted to teach their students why it would make sense to build this particular product or machine. And thus they reached out to other disciplines like psychology, like sociology, ethnography, all disciplines that are very concerned with understanding the human mind, attitudes, and behaviors. And they leveraged their methods like interviewing, observation skills, and brought that into the engineering curriculum in order to understand the why, but also being able to engineer and build a solution. And that was then the how as well. So it is basically a combination of proven methods just put in a specific and logical order in reality today. And this way it stayed for quite some time in the product design area because it came from the mechanical engineering. And it got its hype and it started to being applied very broadly in business is when it was transferred from the product-centric focus to a more service-centric design. So there was a consultancy also around the Stanford University realm, and they applied it beginning of the 2000s for the first time to services. And that opened up a new variety of application areas for design thinking, because it's just such a universal and broad problem-solving approach so that you can apply it now for processes, for creating new products, services, business models, or strategies even. And this variety of problems that you can address with design thinking made it to such an hype today.
That was thoroughly informative. Thank you, Jenny. That gives a great overview of the history. But what does this mean? How can you apply design thinking?
So when we talk with organizations and we try to actually use design thinking in an organization, we try to put a very pragmatic approach to it. What you first need to understand is that design thinking has a way of doing with a certain set of practices, but also a way of thinking with a certain set of principles that you can apply. And going even a step further, so the way of doing can be divided into a process that guides you step by step through the design thinking way of doing, or a toolbox where you pick and choose certain methods that might help you in a specific situation, or you can apply it as a mindset. That means you will internalize a certain set of principles, and that then goes more into organizational change initiatives in organizations. If you Google, or when you Google design thinking, you might find a variety of different process models. They all mean the same, basically to understand the problem and then to iterate on a variety of solutions. We use Stanford's design thinking cycle because we're still in close collaboration with them. And I want to go through the process and the toolbox real quickly with you. So the process, here are some pictures. Basically goes like that. As I said, you understand the problem, you come together as a design thinking team, a multidisciplinary team, share your perspectives, understand then your interview partners, your customers, who do you learn from? So you collect a lot of data from your customers, from your users, you try to make sense out of it in the synthesis phase, and then you start ideating solutions that meet the needs that you have discovered in need finding, and you prototype them real quickly. You can see an example of a really rapid prototype there, and you bring that out again to your customers or potential users in order to test it. And this is an iterative approach that is still guiding you through each step. Looking at the toolbox. So if you don't have time to apply all the design thinking process phase, because usually what we do is we apply it as a project framework. So then it takes about 3 months to go through the steps of design thinking. And we have this as a guiding project management framework, basically. If you want to take some methods out of design thinking, that can be a bit faster. So we have done a recent study on design thinking methods, and it was quite overwhelming that the experts came up with 172 methods that they in total attribute to design thinking. So there's quite a variety of different tools and methods to leverage. We have then ranked these methods, and they still came up with 52 methods that are important, or the most important ones, that they attributed to design thinking. So quite a variety to know. And a good design thinker is basically somebody who can pick and choose and uses the right tool at the right time. And when you use the design thinking tools, go through the process, you become more proficient in that. It becomes kind of a craft. And this way, you become more flexible in applying design thinking. And this way, you can also then integrate these principles, not just in your daily work, but also in your organizational structures.
Such a helpful framework and way of thinking about it. Thank you for sharing that. But I mean, what can I actually expect at the end of a design thinking project? Do I have like a finished thing on the market? What's happening?
That is also a question that I get asked quite frequently with our project partners. And what you do get is a solution in form of a tangible prototype. And this is still a prototype then. And by prototype, we mean it's basically a mock-up that shows the key functionalities. And it's not just written on paper, but it's an experience prototype. So it shows the experience for the user or the people who might be applying this new product or service. And it shows the key functionality. Okay, so on here you can basically see on the slide the process from this very low resolution prototype, from a first rough idea and how it developed over time, to then a digital mock-up, still no technical functionality behind it, but it shows the experience and the key functionality. And this way, this prototype helps you to communicate with your IT department very easily, to show what do you really need to have implemented. This is another example from an organization. It was a German bank where we redesigned the banking advisory and we came up with this timeline to support banking advisors. And here also you can see we usually always start with these low resolution prototypes to not spend too much time or money in testing first ideas. And when we then get sure and certain that we are on the right track of meeting people's needs, then we go more into this higher resolution prototype and spend more programming time or design time into it. And one thing that I really want to address, since we are talking about problems and unsolvable problems, so what does design thinking do basically? And when we look at design thinking or problems in general, we distinguish 3 different kinds of problems. You've already heard from Rachel about wicked problems. But there are also 2 more types of problems, which we call ill-defined and well-defined problems. And I'm going to show you quickly how they can be distinguished and how agile and design thinking play on this. So well-defined problems, let's start to the right. Well-defined problems are characterized by that you know the solution, you basically know the problem, and you know how to get to the solution. And this is often the majority of problems that you have in an organization, which basically means you just have to execute it. That can be hard enough, but you can use your current project management execution tools that you have in place already. We call them disciplined methods. You can basically orchestrate a large amount of employees there, and you just have to go from A to B by executing it. Ill-defined problems have a bit of a different touch. Ill-defined problems are characterized by you know the solution, thus you know the problem, but you don't exactly know how to get to the solution. For example, you might know that you want to create a platform to exchange knowledge from employees or something like that, but you don't know exactly how it might look like in the end. And there, agile methodologies might help you to get there. You still need to know the requirements in order to make that happen, but you can use agile methods like Scrum in order to execute and to adjust and go along the way in order to basically then design your platform. And then there's the wicked problems. And the wicked problems, you don't know the solution, thus you don't know how to get there. And you might have a clue about the problem, but usually you don't even know what is the problem. You only have a gut feeling that you need to do something. This is often problems like digitization. We need to get more digitized. We need to reinvent the mobility of the future. So these are the big questions, and there design thinking comes into play, because design thinking has this experimental approach to exploring your entire problem. And there you only need a small team with different people and a high performance team who can execute that. So what does that come to in the end? Design thinking basically decomposes your problem, your wicked problem, into an ill-defined or well-defined problem that you can then execute on with your known techniques in your organization. I'm looking a little bit at the time, so I might rush a bit further, but you will get the slides anyway, so you can have a read through these slides by yourself. So this was a case study from a German utility company where we applied design thinking first, done a lot of interviews, came up with the final non-technical prototype, which was a platform then for home improvement. And then we went smoothly on to developing this platform in a Scrum manner, because these agile techniques and principles match very well with design thinking. And the design thinking team, for those of you who know Scrum, became then the product owner who constantly applied design thinking tools to test new features and to come up with new functions to fill the product backlog, so to say.
Wow. Excellent. No, that is such fantastic feedback on, particularly on the wicked problems that you can then decompose into these two ill-defined or well-defined problems and get some guidance on which direction to take it. So thank you for clarifying that. So what can we try tomorrow? One thing that I would say is incredibly important to try is to consider your challenge from the perspective of the customer or the user. In the case of not product or service development, but tackling the kind of wicked problem I was talking about earlier, this means really understanding what are the needs. What are the needs you're trying to solve? And going to the source of those needs and developing empathy for those people, finding out what are their lives, what are their pain points, and finding a way to bring that information back in a meaningful way. The next is use storytelling to create shared understanding. Here we have someone preparing storytelling using the design thinking methodology. Here it's about transcribing this person's story onto Post-its, and then in this case they communicated it, and in many cases to the rest of their team, really by putting their finger on the Post-its, explaining what that person is all about in a way that everyone can feel who that person is. You might not be the same person, but you understand where they're coming from, what their needs are, what their pain points are. And these small practices, like putting your finger on the Post-its and making sure you walk through that, can really create a deep understanding. I want to mention one less methodologically rigorous thing that you can do that was also really important in the two examples that I talked about earlier. What we found is that in these workshops at this food company, we had people that spoke different language, that came from different countries, that came from different sectors, and the potential for misunderstanding was enormous. But when talking about a challenge of this complexity, what was really important was sharing specific examples from people in supply chain. So when people described a situation or a person that really encompassed and brought up a picture, the point that they were trying to make, there was a much greater likelihood that people would understand. So even if you're not using a rigorous design thinking process, telling stories that underscore your point can already be really impactful.
Another way to basically solve your problems creatively is, in addition to talking to potential users, doing some kind of benchmarking. And we do a little bit of a different benchmarking than you might be used to. Benchmarking is usually looking at what your competitors do. When we have a problem, we think of how is this problem solved, for example, also in other industries, in order to find analogies that we can learn from. And this is a very bold example and very tangible example in my mind, where the design team tried to redesign the emergency room's operating table, and they were looking at a Formula 1 pit stop because time is of the essence in both situations. And what they could learn from the pit stop example is how they synchronized their roles, how everything was done very meticulously, how they had checklists to do that, and still keeping a very tight time frame. So understanding what they did, they transferred it to the operating table, and then had new checklists and a toolkit on how they could act on. Another one, and we've talked about prototyping before, and prototype have different meaning in different industries. So I'm just going to give you 3 examples to get inspired on what prototyping actually means. because prototyping is really not rocket science on how we understand it. It's about making your ideas tangible. This was an example for a Colombian bank that wanted to make banking products tangible, and we just put them in the supermarket and tested them there. So you don't need a lot of resources or even skills on prototyping first ideas. If you have some ideas for apps or for wireframes, just sketch them quickly. Put them even on an iPad or a Kindle, and the user has the experience of having an app in their hand. Also, if you want to create a programmed avatar that guides you through a banking process, as you can see here, if you don't know whether the solution is desirable yet, just put a person behind a screen and let them interact with the customers in order to, well, represent the avatar. Very simple tools that you can basically apply in a matter of hours. And one last thing from my side, going along with the rough prototypes, basically, if you are a leader in your organization and you ask your team on their progress, don't ask for PowerPoint slides. Ask for prototypes. Ask for project artifacts. Let them show you a story of real people. Ask them also for failures or learnings, because if not one prototype has failed, the team didn't go wide enough and didn't try creative enough. And that was a steering meeting at an insurance company, very traditional one, and everybody interacted with the first kind of ideas.
And finally, diverse teams. I won't elaborate on that, but they're very important because everyone comes from a different background, and the more diverse they are, the more meaningful your solutions are going to be. So I did elaborate on that. And the irony here is a little bit striking, but use time boxing to get things done. So this is something that you can absolutely do tomorrow if you have a task to do. Don't let it take from morning till lunch. Say, I'm going to get this done in half an hour and then be done. Excellent. On that note, hopefully we were able to send you away with the message that needs are really an opportunity and to focus on instead of just solutions, and that there are things you can do tomorrow.
Well, thank you so much, Jennifer and Rachel. This was really inspirational. I will just stop the presentation for you. Oops. Just a second, Julia, can you please start the recording at the other computer? Tiny technical problem, so thank you for listening. And some questions have already come in. Some have already also arrived at the chat. Please copy those questions to the F&A section so that I will actually find them now. Some questions, let's start with the easiest one. They're questions for literature recommendations, book recommendations. I'm sure we can put some in the follow-up, right?
With pleasure.
Very good. So look out for that follow-up email and you will get your recommendations there. Also, of course, you can upvote those questions you like best. So I will take it from the top here. You described the prototype being the outcome of the design thinking process. Where do you make sure that there is a profitable business model behind?
So the business modeling comes in as well. So besides a prototype, you usually have a business model that goes along with it. But you want to make sure you only start with a business model once you have the idea of a solution that's actually desirable. So it comes in later, as I showed you with the 3 bubbles. You start with the desirability and the human, then you check how to make that work, and in the same realm, you ideate on business models and make sure that there is a business case behind it.
Thank you. And is there any difference between design thinking and lean innovation, or what is it?
Yes. Please elaborate.
So from my understanding, design thinking is a bit more of a holistic framework in comparison to, for example, lean startup approaches, where you would most probably start with an idea that you have and you would prototype it in different versions maybe, and then you go also out and test it. So the principle of having customer contact and prototyping early on, trying things out, is the same. What you have up front in design thinking, when you have this wicked problem and you don't know what to do at all, you start with user need finding, you start with interviews and so on, and only then you start prototyping ideas.
And then, I mean, just to summarize, I mean, from my understanding of Lean, it's really focused primarily, like, of course, it's also more human-centered, but it's focused primarily on reducing waste. And design thinking, yes, it does help you by being efficient and reducing waste, ideally, particularly through this prototype approach. However, it has this really human-centric focus on needs right at its center.
Thank you. Very few questions about the outside-in approach. I learned always to understand the need of the customer through different approaches, tests, observations, interviews. So what makes design thinking special than the classic outside-in approach?
It goes absolutely into this direction anyway. What makes design thinking so applicable and why it's such a hype at the moment as well is that design thinking puts it into a logical order, and that helps especially beginners to know where to start, or to at least have guidance on where to start, by still giving a lot of freedom. So design thinking is basically an outside-in approach, and the process models help you to guide you how to start.
Very basic. How do you formulate a good design thinking question? Define at the beginning, asking the question.
One starting point is how might we, and imagining an open end. You want to create a question that creates momentum. So it's something that feels actionable. You want to do something about it. But it's not prescriptive. It doesn't tell you what the solution is. And often, how might we is an exciting way to start that because it opens up all the opportunities as opposed to making you feel like you're dealing with a problem. Do you have anything to add?
Yes, and if I might add, this is the starting point of every design thinking project. And it sounds very basic, but this is really a crucial point. And this is often one of the hardest points. And I have a lot of meetings with organizations in order to just come up with the right inspiring design challenge. Because you want it broad, but not too broad, so that the design thinking team is lost. Yeah. You don't want it too narrow, because then your innovation potential is shrinking. Sometimes it also makes sense to start it a little bit more narrow, because then the team has guidance, because you will go broad anyway. And one important thing is the design challenge or problem statement might change over time, and you have to be prepared for that. That means a project manager or a sponsor of a project needs to be aware that the solution or even the actual problem might be a different one than originally expected.
And I would just jump in there one more time by saying that it is a process that involves a certain level of uncertainty. So there is a process model, and this is one of the things I love about it. It gives you steps for achieving innovative potential. However, there are moments where you feel like you don't quite know what is going on, and it's not particularly comfortable. And that's definitely a part of the process to be aware it's probably going to strike and to get used to.
Well, thank you. So it has a lot to do with culture. In German companies, I have the feeling that it is more of a method that you apply than a mindset. For example, we do design thinking from 10 to 11 in the morning. Can it really transform the culture? Do you have any thoughts on that?
So on doing design thinking from 10 to 11 in the morning. So let me say briefly, so I also work in a hierarchical organization. So the way that it works for me in my work life is to use frequently the toolbox and not the process. And I personally live a little bit by the mindset, but it is tricky to create a new organizational structure. So I think that is absolutely a challenge with design thinking. And I actually would love to hear Jenny talk about this one, because you work with this all the time.
Absolutely. And I work quite a bit with traditional organizations, from banking, insurance, central banks, public institutions. So it can't be more traditional than that from my point of view. And I'm even a bit of a conservative design thinker myself, to be honest. So yes, in theory or in general, if you would ask somebody at Stanford, they would say design thinking is a mindset and not a process or toolbox or whatever. However, you need some guidance in order to really make these principles work and in order to internalize these principles. And from our understanding, repeating the process or using the tools over and over again, you become fluent and you internalize the principles as well. Because it doesn't make any sense if I tell Rachel, fail early and often or be more customer-centric, if she has no tools on how to actually do that. Mm-hmm. And this is why we usually all start with the methods and the process, and then you go more into a strategic direction, seeing first success cases, and then people will buy into the principles of design thinking. But it takes time.
Mm-hmm. Do you have a success story on that one?
Well, there are several ones. So what we often then have is that using design thinking projects on an ongoing basis in order to understand the problems first, and then starting by these success cases in order to really reorganize your organization and putting design thinking ambassadors in the business units who can then facilitate also in different business units to spark the spirit of design thinking.
Yeah.
So the next question is, what are the common mental barriers and how to overcome them? Do you just have to start with design thinking, or what do you do?
Jenny and I started in different ways. I just started. I honestly saw an incredibly complex challenge that wasn't getting solved using traditional methods in a traditional organization, and I found it incredibly frustrating. And I wanted to find a way to solve it. And design thinking was that way. So it was too late for this particular problem, but not for the next ones that came. And I just did it. I probably didn't do it very well at first, certainly not. But even the perfunctory attempts that happened at the beginning, I think created more impactful solutions than would have come out without any customer and human centricity and need finding at all. Yeah.
And in addition, from my side, I mean, this is my basically daily job as a consultant to make people overcome these mental hurdles. And that most often means that you need an external coach, somebody who knows design thinking and who is willing to push you out and to send you out in a still safe environment. And you might start small, but you have somebody pushing you out, showing some success cases, and that way slowly you will get more fluent in that. And it, of course, always helps to have some top management support who just says, let's try that out. And you have the freedom to actually do a design thinking project properly. And in the best case, you do see some success cases or better products.
And even if you have to convince your boss, you're lucky that the research is on your side. So you can bring some studies in.
Absolutely. So, how much time do you usually spend to introduce these methods to people unfamiliar to design thinking? When are they ready to start?
They can vary vastly, from an hour, ideally, to much longer.
So this is one thing that I feel very passionate about, because often design thinking is perceived as the silver bullet and we just need to get together for one workshop day and we will solve all the problems that we couldn't solve before. And that's not reality. In one day, you can understand the basic principles and methods of design thinking, but solving your real problems, that takes some time. And innovation and creativity is also a function of productivity. And what we usually do if companies want to take design thinking seriously is we set up a 3-month project, because usually I get to hear from project sponsors, Jennifer, you have 100 days, make it work. And in this 100 days, I try to assemble a multidisciplinary team with a capacity of 2 days a week. And this way we have a 3-month project going through the steps of design thinking, talking to users. And this is a good amount where you can really create a good high-resolution prototype that is deeply grounded in the needs of people.
However, I can say that at the executive school, one thing that we do, and it's absolutely much better than nothing, is I think that you can, so personally, my first design thinking experience was a 2-day boot camp. And this clearly did not give me the deep, intense skills and design thinking that you would get after the kind of intensive and really meaningful introduction that would be what we would all hope for. But this is absolutely enough to really get a clear sense of how this can truly change the way that you work. Yeah.
So one last question, maybe a bit of a philosophical one. Please, still maybe you manage a short answer. For as great as design thinking is at solving many of today's problems, what's missing is a view to distant futures. If we're solving the challenges of today, how do you really tackle the cutting edge innovations of the future?
This is an absolutely pressing question, and I think it's one that we're all struggling with. And I think that, God, how do you solve the problems of the future, the real cutting-edge problems that we don't know about today? God, you do the best you can. Do you have any more meaningful? You do. Awesome.
I do have actually a very specific answer. And you can also download an ebook for free, which is called Playbook for Foresight Thinking.
We'll put that in the
that goes on the reading list.
That also comes from Stanford University, and these are tools that help you look more into the future based on the past. If you're familiar, for example, with personas, creating archetypes of your customers, there is a tool out there which is called Future Persona. So there are some ways that stretch you to the future, and that where you use methods where you can look into the future and analyze trend research and so on. And since design thinking is such a holistic framework, you can easily integrate these foresight thinking tools at the beginning when you want to understand a problem.
Well, thank you so much. I think our time is up, or more than up. Thank you so much for staying with us. We'll send around the slides and the link to the recording and further recommendations sometime next week. Thank you both. Do you have anything to add?
No, thank you for sticking around. It was quite the ride, and we're grateful that you stuck it out till the end. And on your side, parting words?
Take the human-centered mindset with you, and maybe think for today about who is your customer, and do you know their needs, and how can you solve them.
So, thank you again, and thank you.